Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, very nice, thank you.
How's-
Well,
yeah,
I'm not that
I
bad.
understand. Morning all. How are you? Hey, Marlene. You good, Gordo? Well, before we start, I want to remind everybody that 6 months ago I stood beside this same pile of reports when this was delivered. And I mentioned that this document titled A Call for Change was vital to make sure that we do drive change. And through all of these, there were many opportunities to deliver change. This one had something front and centre which made it particularly valuable. It had KPIs with timelines to drive that change. There were 20 recommendations to be delivered within 6 months. The government is yet to deliver a single one of those publicly after that period of time. Imagine being one of the brave whistleblowers who came forward and told your story to try and drive that change, to know that the government has not listened to your cry for help. And so, it joins a growing list of reports, inquiries, royal commissions, where the government has made an announcement and not followed through. 6 months, a call for change, and to know that so little change has been delivered is deeply concerning. We are going to continue to raise this because it matters. And good governments have an attention to detail, and when things get announced, things get done. And when KPIs are set, someone has to be held accountable. And for the government to not have spoken publicly about a single one of these 20 recommendations shows everything you need to know. The change will only come when the state government starts listening and starts taking whistleblowers seriously, and when ministers are held accountable for the commitments that are made. I'll ask the Shadow Attorney General to make some comments.
Thanks, David. Well, this is a call for change, but it's a call that has gone unanswered. A watershed report with 78 recommendations, with specific timeframes, and we are still yet to publicly hear about the implementation of the recommendations. And it follows all of the other reports that we've had over the last 8 years. And these are important recommendations. Things like establishing a permanent command and officer structure within the police service to deal with domestic and family violence. Things like specific safe spaces for people in police stations. And other recommendations in relation to, for example, excellence in policing in responses to domestic violence. And so far, all we've heard from this government to this call for change is crickets. It just is indicative of a government that continues to be a government of chaos and crisis, that only responds when it's called out, is only interested in how things look, and is not interested in making the changes that are necessary. And we've got stations full of hard-working police who respond and deal with domestic violence hour after hour, day after day. And they need the support of this government, but at the moment they're just not getting it. As I say, a watershed report 6 months ago with specific timeframes, and still publicly we are not seeing any evidence of the changes that should be being delivered right now. David?
Thank you.
That's a quick question on the resi care first of all.
Yeah.
We'll go back to this issue. What do you make about these kids who are staying together, and should they be separated in your view?
We can't have resi care to become the funnel for a lifetime of crime. It's a place where kids need to be supervised and to turn their lives around, not to become a breeding ground for the next generation of crims. And that's what we're seeing. And when you hear of some of the reports where no one is taking responsibility, where no one is driving the change to community safety and to behaviour, that is deeply troubling. Now, we've heard repeatedly where the Premier and others have blamed parents. Well, in this case, the responsible person providing that guidance is the state government. So when 1 in 4 offenders come out of the child safety system, that shows you how broken it is in providing safety for the community, but also creating an environment to turn kids around. You can't have a situation where people living in these facilities aren't held accountable for their behaviour and aren't given the opportunity to turn their life around. It is a broken system. And there is one provider here. It's the state government. And they owe it to Queenslanders to get this right.
What would the element be to change or fix as
To make sure that where people are put into facilities, that 2 things occur. One is, first and foremost, community safety must be paramount. And that means that there has to be supervision at all times, whatever that facility looks like. The second, though, is you must use facilities to turn people around. And you've heard me talk about gold standard early intervention. Well, that looks like at all parts of the system. That looks like when somebody has their first interaction with the law. That looks like if they look like they're straying from the law. That looks like when they are in a detention centre or a resi facility of whatever capacity it is. You must have programs to turn people around. Otherwise, you are just waiting for the next chink in the revolving door. And that is what we're seeing at the moment. So it is, we are failing offenders and we are failing the community at every step in the youth justice system, at every step, and it must change.
So do you think there are good things as long as they're well resourced?
It's about ensuring that first and foremost community safety is paramount, first and foremost. And then whatever the detention / facility looks like, it must provide opportunity to better people as well. And it's both of those elements, regardless of what the structure of that facility looks like. You've got to protect the community first and foremost, and you have to be able to provide programs to turn kids around.
I know this came up in some guys, but just your position again on
It's not part of our suite of measures, and for a couple of reasons. The first is I have seen the escalation in repeat offenders. It's gone from 10 to 17%, and I have listened to the cries from the Queensland Police, who say that they have never felt more broken, battered, bruised and overstretched. So we want their efforts to be focused on ensuring that there are consequences for action and that we are able to implement things like breach of bail and have a proper system to keep the community safe and turn kids around.
just on the recommendations for change. Do you support all of the recommendations like that? That push to make sure police aren't investigating themselves and you have sort of like a civilian run integrity?
Well, we've repeatedly asked the government to spell out publicly what the course forward is on all of these recommendations. Now, we said at the time we back them and we want to see more details on them, and that remains. But I'm serious about implementing them. And the government has agreed with timelines and has walked away, and no one wins when that occurs.
So if you're elected, you'll push for that civilian run?
Well, there's 18 months until the election, so every one of these recommendations have to be bedded down on the timeline given. And we've repeatedly asked the government to show where the next step is on all of them. Now, today is a day that people must be held accountable. Now, one of the things I asked immediately was to outline which minister is responsible for each of these. There are a myriad of ministers involved, but one way or another there is one person who must accept responsibility for all of them, and that is the Premier. Now, it's not acceptable for the Premier to say, well, those were targets set and that we're not going to do anything about it. The Premier must get interested in the job again and hold every one of those ministers accountable for this failing and tell us how soon they will be fixed, because they are serious recommendations and it is a serious issue. And there has been a multitude of opportunities where change could have been driven, and Queenslanders can't wait for that change any longer.
I guess when the law came down, there were some people that weren't fully backing that recommendation.
Yeah.
That you're saying would do.
Yeah, and we've asked the government for details about how that will be done, and I think that's fair and reasonable. Now, the government has said that it's implementing all of the recommendations. And we have said that we'll go on that journey as well, because it's important that people have faith that we are serious about driving reform when it comes to domestic and family violence. Now, if the government has additional information on any of those recommendations, we will sit down and we'll listen to it and we will work with them. But it's not acceptable to get 6 months into the process and for not one of the 20 recommendations to have been publicly dealt with. That is not acceptable. So we'll continue to work with the government as any information comes forward. We are serious about this, and it's time for someone to be held accountable for the failings to implement these. Thanks, guys. See you later. Have a good day.